Bible Answers with Dr. Al Garza.
Welcome back to another edition of Bible Answers Unfiltered. I am your host, Dr. Al Garza. So today I'm going to be looking at John 1:1 and verse 14. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the Word became flesh and tabernacled among us. I'm going to be looking at this because it is suggested that John is reflecting off of wisdom type literature when he's writing about the Word. Now, there are many scholars who do think that, and there's other scholars who think John is reflecting off of the Targum oral tradition, or the Jewish tradition of the Targum, in the sense that's reflecting to the Memra, the Logos in the Greek, or Devar in Hebrew. So we're going to see which one fits better within the genre. Is John really looking at wisdom literature, or is he looking at oral tradition, oral Jewish tradition within the Aramaic, which is a commentary, a explanation, and interpretation of the Hebrew Bible? And so we're going to see which one fits better. There are those that are non-Trinitarians who hold to the wisdom Christology type of explanation, and other scholars, including myself, that feel he's looking at the Targum oral tradition of who the word, the Memra, Devar, is in context in relation to God himself. So let's go ahead and move forward and get this started with explaining the relevance of John 1:1 and verse 14 within both the genres and see which one fits. All right, so before we actually get started, I want to make a quick comment here. Now, I was sent this video by one of my subscribers asking me to give a comment or to do a review. Now, this is Dr. Dustin Smith giving a teaching or an explanation on the prologue of the Gospel of John in regards to wisdom type literature in comparison to how the word that John speaks of in John 1:1 all the way down to 1:18 is associated with wisdom type literature. Now, before anybody comes to any conclusions, I've read Dr. Dustin Smith's book. I have it right here, Wisdom Christology in John's Gospel, so people don't think that I'm just not familiar with what he actually teaches. I've read the book. I've marked a few pages where I focused on in this PowerPoint. What was left out, as the caption says, is I feel that they did not even discuss about the translation tradition of the Targum, how it was understood at that time during the Second Temple period, and how it relates to the Hebrew understanding of Devar. In Hebrew, the word is associated with the divine name, something wisdom is not associated with. Now, wisdom has its own type of genre in poetry, and we're going to look at the slide focusing mainly on the Memra and how it was understood, and how John is pulling from the tradition of the Aramaic Targum, or the translation from the Hebrew scriptures, which is a type of commentary. Now, this is not to talk down to Dustin Smith or say he doesn't know what he's talking about, really, per se. I'm saying that there is a genre that fits better with the word in association to where it belongs. He believes it's wisdom type literature, and I'm going to say it's not. Yes, you can draw some parallels, but ultimately, when you pull everything together, it does not fit what I think Dr. Smith is trying to say regards in this book or in this lesson. Now, I have a link down below so you can watch the whole video yourself and compare it with mine and see where you think it might fit better. If you're a Unitarian, of course, you're going to look at Dr. Smith's probably his view as the best view. If you're a Trinitarian, you're going to see it my view. If you're on the fence, well, take both sides and really, and if you can, buy his book, read it. Watch my video and other books that I've written on the Trinity, and do a comparison. But again, we're going to see, from my view, where the word actually fits better within the genre of the Hebrew Bible. All right, so let's get started. All right, so let's start with what is a Targum. Now, the etymology of Targum. The word Targum comes from the Semitic root tergam. Now, tergam is the root word, the Semitic root word where we get Targum. And in Akkadian, the Targumanu means in translator or interpreter. So it's translator, interpreter from the Akkadian usage of it. So we have Targumanu, we have tergam in the scriptures, in the Semitic root word. And in the Bible, in the Hebrew Bible, we find it in Ezra 4:7. This is where the word appears for the first time. And in Ezra 4:7, it goes, The letter was written in Aramaic or Aramite and interpreted metargam into Aramaic. So we have that word right there, metargam, which means interpreted. So now the usage in a synagogue, this is important as well. The Targum referred to oral translations of scripture during synagogue readings, and the translator was called Hametargim, the one who translates. So Hametargim means the one who translates, and it means literally to translate, to explain, or to interpret. These are the meanings of the word. So we have the root word, the Semitic root word. We have the Akkadian usages. We find it in Ezra 4:7 of the Hebrew Bible. And therefore, the Targum can mean translation, interpretation, or an explanation of the Hebrew, of the biblical text. Okay, so the biblical text we're referring to here. So many times what you're going to see is it reflects more of a paraphrase, because if you look at the Targum and you compare it to the Hebrew Bible, it's not going to always follow word for word in translation. It's very loose, it's a paraphrase, it's interpreting or explaining. This is why you'll see added words into the text, or more of a loosely type explanation, because it's trying to tell you what the Hebrew Bible is saying. So again, this is what we need to understand about the Targum. So the Targum is giving you an interpretation and an explanation within a translation itself of the biblical text. So this is where we start from. We need to understand this because we're going to see this as reflective of the word memra, davar in Hebrew, but we're going to see how it's understood from this method, or what we call the Targum. Okay, so let's begin with Paul and the Targum tradition. And this is important because here we're going to find that Paul himself, a Pharisee from the house of Hillel, who studied at the feet of Gamaliel, who was the son of Hillel, references the oral tradition of a Targum of Exodus 7:11. Now here in 2 Timothy 3:8, Paul writes, just as Jannes and Jambres opposed Moses, so these men also oppose the truth, men corrupted in mind and disqualified regarding the faith. Now the names Jannes and Jambres, the magicians of Pharaoh, do not appear in the Hebrew Bible, but are preserved in Jewish tradition and the Targums on Exodus 7 verse 11. Now this is important because it summarizes that Paul draws from Jewish interpretive tradition to warn Timothy about false teachers who resist God's truth, just as Pharaoh's magicians resisted Moses. So again, Paul references Jewish oral tradition of the Targum, that this is Jannes and Jambres in Exodus 7:11, which don't appear in the Hebrew Bible, only in Jewish tradition and in the Targum itself. Now, as the written form of the Targum is developed, these names are put in there because it's part of Jewish oral tradition. So even Paul himself, as a Pharisee, Shaul is his name, from the house of Hillel, understood the Targum oral tradition within Jewish sources and applied it here when writing to Timothy about this. So this is important because this is precedent. This gives us precedent to understand that even John himself is writing, when he opens up with John 1:1, is going to be reflective of the Jewish Targum, or the oral tradition of the Jewish Targum of that time. And we're going to see that just like Paul here references the two individuals' names within the Jewish oral tradition of the Targum, as does John. And we're going to see this because there's a big connection here. As you can see the names here, and John is going to go back to Genesis 1 and put the Word was God, or the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and that's what we find, that's what we're going to be finding in the oral Targum tradition as well, which we're going to see. So let's continue. Okay, so let's start with John 1:1. So here's John 1:1 from the ESV version. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Now this is a standard English translation. Every translation pretty much reads the same. Now we get to the Greek, of course, we have hein arche hein ha logos, kai ha logos, hein proston theon, kai theos, hein ha logos. Again, standard Greek translation, universally agreed upon in that way. Now we do have about a dozen or so Hebrew New Testament manuscripts of the Gospel of John, dating in the medieval period. They all pretty much say the same, except for maybe one manuscript that agrees more with the Aramaic Targum, which we'll talk about later. But this is how they all read the same. Now, again, they're all textual variants with maybe a spelling of a word or a prefix and so forth. But universally, they read this way: Bereshit haya hadavar, v'hadavar haya etzel ha'elohim, v'ha'elohim haya hadavar. Now, again, this one, this reading from the Hebrew manuscripts reads it as Haya Etzel HaElohim. and he was next to God. That word etzel in Hebrew means next to God. So now it can be translated with. Typically, though, it's understood as being next to, not really with God, next to God. So as the Greek emphasizes more of halogos, hein, proston, theon, and the word was with God, this one feeds more of, and the word was next to God, emphasizing it's just more than a personification of some wisdom type literature. This is something that personifies as a person who is next to God, which you see in the New Testament manuscripts of Jesus being next to God. He was seated next to God. There's two thrones in heaven. All these aspects understand that this was the Word who was next to God. So again, V'hadavar haya etzel ha'elohim, and the Word was next to God. Now again, we're going to look at one manuscript that actually reads more like a Targum, but this is how the understood within the standard English, Greek, and Hebrew translations of the Bible. All right, so now let's take a look at Genesis 1:1, since John himself is referencing Genesis 1:1 with "in the beginning was the Word." So let's take a look. Now here we have the Hebrew Masoretic text, the standard text used for pretty much every English translation. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashemayim ve'et ha'eretz. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. This is well understood as God is creating the heavens and the earth. He's forming and shaping everything. Now, in a Targum Neofiti standard translation, interpretation, of course, commentary, paraphrase, if you want to call, in the beginning, Yahweh created the heavens and the earth by or with his word, memra. Now, that's why when we look at the word by his, we see the bet in here, the prefix bet, memra. It could be either with or by his word. So most people put by, but it actually could mean with his word. So he created the heavens and the earth with his word, by his word. So this is the Targum Neofiti standard translation. Now they did remove the Elohim, and if you look at, let's say, the Onkelos Targum with the footnotes, you'll see that they explain why they took it out. Is because Elohim presented a plural form of God, that they didn't want the reader, a Jewish reader, to read and think that God was plural. So they didn't want that confusion of why is it plural? Why didn't Moses just write in the beginning Yahweh created the heavens and the earth? Well, he didn't. He wrote Elohim because obviously the word was involved with and by his word. If you look at the Neofiti variant son, in the beginning, the son of Yahweh created the heavens and the earth. Now, this is more of a medieval reading of the Targum Neofiti variant. It's an early variant, but this goes along with a Hebrew manuscript of the Gospel of John we have. There's one that reads, in the beginning was the Son, and the Son was with God, and the Son was God. And again, the Hebrew reading is with or next to God. So the Son in this one manuscript is agreeing with this variant son of this Targum. Again, the Son is associated with the Word. The Word, of course, became flesh, the Son. In another variant, they added wisdom in there, another textual variant, in the beginning with wisdom, the word of Yahweh created the heavens and the earth. So these are the three major Targum variants we see, standard variants with the other two. But again, removing Elohim, replacing it with Yahweh, adding with or by his word in creation, and the Son of Yahweh in the one of the Neophites, and of course with wisdom, the word of Yahweh created. So the creation happens with Elohim, which Jews didn't like the plural form, so they changed it to Yahweh. But of course, the plural form reflects the Word who was involved in creation, who was the Son. And with wisdom, the Word created. It was with and by the Word, the Memra. So again, these are how we need to connect. This is what John is referring to. He is not pulling, which we'll see later, he is not pulling from wisdom type literature and creating the word that way. He's pulling from the Targum oral tradition, as Paul did, and so John is also. He's writing this in a way that the reader will understand where this is coming from, not wisdom literature. All right, so let's continue with John 1:1b. We looked at 1:1a, now let's look at 1:1b, where "and the Word was with God," and look at the parallels in the Targums. So the standard Hebrew to English translation reads, "and they heard the voice of Yahweh Elohim walking in the garden." Now this is, again, standard English translation based on the Hebrew Masoretic text. Then we have the Targum. "And they heard the voice of the Memra of Yahweh Elohim walking in the garden." You'll notice that the word the Memra of Yehovah Elohim. Now they took out the Tetragrammaton and added the Memra of Yahweh Elohim. Is walking in the garden. They were hearing his voice, and they heard his voice. So again, this is speaking directly of the word. It's connected with the divine name and replaced with the Memra of Yehovah rather than keeping the divine name. And this is interesting because in wisdom type literature, we don't see this. We're going to talk about that more later, but we don't see the wisdom replacing a divine name or being referenced as the divine name in any kind of exchange. So this is the Memra of Yehovah Elohim walking in the garden. And again, replacing the Tetragrammaton. So this is important because we're going to see this is a constant theme within the Torah itself. This is in Genesis 3:8. So let's go to the next one. Let's go to the next one here of John 1:1b, and the word was with God parallels in the Hebrew translation of the English. And I'll read the whole context here, and then we'll reflect on what I put there for the partial part that we need to focus on. So the whole of it is, then Jacob made a vow saying, if God will be with me and will keep me or guard me on this journey that I take and will give me food to eat and garments to wear, and I return to my father's house in safety, then Yahweh will be my God. So again, if we look at this, if God will be with me and guard me, then Yahweh will be my God. Now, the Targum translation, of course, into English is, if the word of Yahweh, the Memra, will be with me and guard me, then the word of Yahweh will be my God. Now, this is a direct connection that it is the word of Yahweh. It is who will guard and protect and be Jacob's God. This is how the Jewish translators who are explaining, interpreting the passage, understand this to mean. Again, the voice of Yahweh, the voice of Yahweh comes from the Memra of Yahweh Elohim. And of course, we have in creation, who is, in the beginning, it was the Word, the Son, who created the heavens and the earth. And here again, as these Jewish interpreters from the Aramaic are telling you, is that it's the Word who will be with Jacob and guard him, and he will be his God. Again, this goes back to John 1. John understands this oral tradition of the Targum, as does Paul. So he's reflecting here. This is not wisdom genre literature. I know Unitarians want to believe this, and I know it's something they have to me at least, force into the text. But if you parallel this with the Targums are not wisdom literature. They're not in that genre of text. These are interpretations and explanations of the passage. It's like a commentary. If you read a commentary, someone's giving you a commentary in your Bible, you can't say, "Oh, that's all wisdom type." No, it's not. They're telling you from the Torah itself. Genesis is not wisdom literature, what the Torah really means, and they're explaining it to the reader. So this is important, okay? So this is what we need to understand. All right, so this 1:1b of Exodus 28 gives you the word of Yahweh who will guard, protect, and be Jacob's God. So this is what we see. We're going to continue to see this as we move forward. All right, let's continue with the next one, Exodus 19:17. I'll read it in context here. And Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet Elohim, and they stood at the foot of the mountain, or at the lower part of the mountain. Now again, the Targum takes out Elohim and replaces it with the Memra, the word of Yahweh. And Moses brought the people out to meet the Memra of Yahweh. Again, this is what we're going to see a consistent theme of. This is not wisdom personification literature. This is the Torah itself giving you a window into the word of Yahweh. Now we're going to see conclusively towards the end how the word who appeared to Abraham, who appears to Elijah, and throughout the rest of the scriptures as a whole, is always spoken of as a person and distinct person from Yahweh himself. And again, this is just building up to this point, and we see this continually of a replacement of the divine names and the divine Elohim with the Memra, the word, in non-wisdom literature. Okay. Now, this is one of my favorite verses in the book of Exodus, dealing with God in the plural form. Now, again, this does connect to John 1:1. We are dealing with the distinction of the Word who was with or next to God, but this is not the same person or some personification of wisdom. So here we read in English of Genesis 33:14. Now the context, let's clear the context, is Moses is asking God. He's saying to him earlier, verse 12, but you yourself have not let me know whom you will send with me, because God is, asking him to bring the people to him, but he wants to know, who are you going to send with me to go with me? And he says, let me know your ways that I may know you, so that I may find favor in your sight. Consider too that this nation is your people. And God responds by saying, and he said, my persons slash faces, this is plural, they will go and I will give you rest. Now, this is important. We'll talk about the cross reference here, but this is important because the Hebrew here is actually plural with they will go. My persons, my faces in the lexicon show that this is referring to the persons of God or the faces of God. And he says, they will go and I will give you rest. And again, the Targum understands this as saying, and he said, God said, my word will go with you and he will give you rest. So the plurals of they will go and I will give you rest, with the commentators and the explanation from the Jewish perspective is this is the word who will go with Moses and will give him rest. And again, if you cross references when Moses wants to see God's glory, his full glory, who he is, not just an appearance or manifestation or revealing, but his actual glory, who he is. At the last verse of chapter 33, God says, but my persons, my faces will not be seen. They will not be seen. Okay? They will not be seen. So again, that is the plural. In the Hebrew, it's in the plural. So again, the Jewish commentators who are explaining this verse from the Targum are saying this is the word who will go. This is the word and God's full glory of persons and faces. They will not be seen by Moses or anyone, because no one can see God like that and live. God can reveal and manifest himself in a way that you won't die, as he does throughout the scriptures. But if you want to see God's full glory, which is what Moses is asking, no, he says, my faces, my persons, they will not be seen that way. They will not. And this is one of them, who is the Memra, the word, who will go and he will give you rest, or give him rest. So this is important because this really brings in the pluralness of God in his persons, his faces, his presence. It's all plural in the Hebrew, and the Targum recognizes it as being the word who will go, and the word is part of the pluralness of persons and faces who will not be seen, as Moses wanted to see. Okay, but let's continue. Let's move on. All right, this is another great verse from Deuteronomy 31:3. Now, from the Hebrew to English translation, we have Yahweh your God is the one who goes before you. Of course, the context as Moses is speaking to Israel, he explains to them that he is too old to go with him. And he says, it is in verse 3, it is Yahweh your God who will cross ahead of you. He will destroy these nations before you, and so on. Now, again, the Targum, the interpreters, the translators here, they understand. They're explaining this. They say this is the Memra of Yahweh, your God, will pass over before you. So they remove the divine name and they put the word of Yahweh, who is your God who will pass over you. He will pass over before you. This is important because wisdom is never used this way. It is not used this way where it's replacing Yahweh or God. It might be associating wisdom with God, with him in different ways, but it's never replacing him as if he is their God or he is Yahweh. The Targums do, and the interpreters, the translators, the ones that we explained earlier, they are the ones saying, oh, Yahweh your God, oh, that's the word Yahweh your God. Again, looking back at John 1:1, this is what we see the word is. He's not only in the beginning was he there from Genesis 1:1, but he was next to God and he was God. As all these Targums are saying, this is not wisdom literature. This is the Torah being explained and interpreted by Jewish scribes who were writing this in Aramaic, telling you what the text means. And we're going to conclude with the next PowerPoint on John 1:1b and give you a summary of what we're seeing so far before we get to 1c. So let's move on. All right, so in summary and connection to John 1:1b, we see in the Targums the word or the memra of Yahweh is consistently described as being with God and acting as God toward his creation and his people. Now, this is exactly what we see that we just looked at from the Torah, not wisdom literature, but from the Torah itself, from Genesis all the way down to Deuteronomy. That the word, and I could have given you many more passages, hundreds of more with the Memra replacing Yahweh and Elohim, but I selectively put a few on there so you can see the connection that the interpreters, the translators, the ones explaining this from the Aramaic Targum, they're telling you that the word is Yahweh and is Elohim, is the word of Yahweh. Again, we're going back to John 1:1, and this is what we need to understand. There's connection again with this is a direct echo of Targumic pattern, and the word was with God, John 1:1b, a direct echo. We just saw that John is not referring to wisdom literature. He could have easily used wisdom, the chokmah or Sophia in the Greek. He could have easily put that from the beginning. In the beginning was chokmah or Sophia. I mean, easily could have done that. But he's chose the word, the logos, the memra, the var, because this is what how the targums understand, the interpreters and the ones explaining the passages, they understood it as being a direct connection with Yahweh Elohim himself, as part of the Elohim, as doing in creation, appearing to his people, speaking to his people, being their God, doing all these things in a very Targumic pattern. So again, this is what we see, and now we're going to go to John 1:1c, and we're going to look at that as well and see a connection with the Targum in that area. So let's go. All right, so let's review 1c here of John 1:1. And God was the Word. Greek, of course, kai theos ein halagos, and the Word was God. In the Hebrew, veha Elohim hayah davar, and the Word was God. Um, all read the same, all understood the same. Uh, Again, we're going to see the Targum parallels with what is being understood here that John is reflecting back to. This is not wisdom literature. He's reflecting back to commentary, Jewish commentary within the Targum, oral tradition, explanation. He's referencing this as explaining and teaching and telling, interpreting what the word and who the word is in connection to the Torah and the whole of the Hebrew scriptures. So let's look at this again, and we're going to look at some of the passages, even some of the ones we used in 1b. We're going to look at again and emphasize that the word was God. All right, let's take another one at look at Genesis 28:21 in parallel with John 1:1c, and God was the Word. Again, we saw from the Hebrew to English translation, this is Jacob speaking. Jacob clearly says in the English, after he makes a vow, then Yahweh will be my God. Okay, remember seeing that. Of course, the Targum, the English translation, then the word of Yahweh will be my God. Here the Memra is not just with Jacob, but is explicitly called God, or in direct connection with the word of Yahweh will be my God. He is called God in that sense. Just like John 1:1 says, and the word was God. Jacob says the word will be my God. Therefore, he is God. This is not speaking in a wisdom type fashion. The wisdom is never associated or spoken of in this way at all. Not amongst, in the Torah or anywhere else. Again, it's you have to appeal to me, at least for me, it's direct eisegesis. It's not exegesis, it's eisegesis. Here, the interpreters, the translators, writing the Targum in Aramaic from the Hebrew express that the Memra, the word of Yahweh, will be my God. Jacob is saying this. So again, a direct connection of the word being God directly. All right, let's look at another verse we haven't used it. It's a really good verse. Of course, the Hebrew translation is, "For what great nation is there that has God so near to it as Yahweh our God is, whenever we call upon him?" Now, what's interesting about this is that in the Hebrew, and the context, of course, is Israel is urged to obey God's Torah, the law, the commandments of God. And so this phrase is brought in, but it's interesting because in the Hebrew, Elohim here is plural with the verb so near or near, the near ones. It's also plural in Hebrew. So it modifies Elohim as plural. Now, then it says, as Yehovah our God is, whenever we call upon him. Now the Targum changes it to a singular and puts the Memra of Yehovah in the Neofiti version. For what great nation is there that has the Memra of Yahweh near to them whenever we call upon him? So the Memra is placed directly in the role of God himself, the one Israel calls upon. So again, this is a switch between the plural from the Hebrew, and the Targum interpreters say the plural goes singular to the Memra of Yahweh. Now, there are some Targums that actually, like Onkelos, that keeps Elohim in there as a plural. And it's debated on why it's that way. Some say it's referring to pagan gods, or the other rabbis or Jewish sources say no, it's directly to God himself in a plural way. Now, of course, they have the plural majesty and all this stuff, but I've already dealt with that in other videos and other papers. So the Targum identifies the plural in this sense as the word, the Memra of Yahweh. So it brings in the Yahweh, our God, as Memra of Yahweh near to them whenever we call upon him. So again, this is not wisdom literature. It doesn't fit the genre, as we can keep seeing here as looking at John 1:1c. This is the plural first, the plural of God in Hebrew with the near ones referring to Elohim. To it is as Yahweh, our God, our Elohim. Again, Elohim is on its own plural whenever we call upon him, and then the Targum uses it as the Memra of Yahweh. So again, this is interchanging. This is what we expect to find if we're dealing with the Memra as Elohim, as Yahweh, and this is what we're going to continue to find. Again, this is not wisdom literature. It doesn't fit the genre. Yes, you can draw out parallels with the with Proverbs and Hebrew poetry, intertestamental writings in poetry type style writing, but in the Torah itself, Torah is not poetry. It's giving you the explanation and the interpretation from the Aramaic of what these verses mean. And we're going to continue to see this on. And we're going to deal with the parallels of wisdom literature soon. But let's keep moving on. All right, so let's give a teaching summary here. Now, remember, John 1:1c, and the Word was, and God was the Word. Again, we talked about the parallels within the Targums themselves. The teaching summary is that the Word was God. John declares that the Logos, the Memra, or even the Devar is fully God. Is Yahweh God, to be more exact. In Genesis 28:21, we saw the Memra of Yahweh will be my God. Deuteronomy 4:7, the Memra of Yahweh is near when we call upon him. And of course, Memra is God himself, revealed exactly John's point about Jesus as the Word. We saw this in the beginning was the Word, Genesis, in the beginning, and of course the Word was next to God. And all the things that God does in action, it's the Word in connection with Yahweh Elohim, as well as being Elohim himself and Yahweh, because they take those titles and replace it with the word, the Memra of Yahweh. Similar to Devar Yahweh, the word of Yahweh in Hebrew, it is Yahweh himself who speaks and who does these things. Now we're going to take a look at John 1:14 in relation to the Targum, because this is where the word becomes flesh. And you're going to see a direct parallel with the Targum, not wisdom literature. Now, yes, you can say, well, wisdom is embodied at certain points, this and this. Yes, but not the same as the word is. Again, we're talking about two different genres here. The word that becomes flesh is spoken of in the Torah, not in wisdom literature, in a way that we saw here is directed as being God himself, Yahweh God, as the Memra, as Devar, as the Logos. Wisdom as a feminine form, she does this, she does that, is never associated as being God, never replaced by being God, not doing things as God, and is a created thing of God, where the Logos is not. Complete opposite. Again, the genre does not fit, as we're going to see with John 1:14. So let's look at it. All right, so let's take a look at John 1:14 here. And the Word became flesh and dwelt, or tabernacled among us. And the parallels that we see within the Targum and the Hebrew and the Targum interpretation or explanation of this, which comes basically from Exodus 25:18, for the Masoretic text English translations, and they will make me a sanctuary, and I will dwell among them. Of course, this is the offerings for the sanctuary. And the New American Standard, let them construct a sanctuary for me that I may dwell among them. So this is referring to God dwelling with his people through the sanctuary. And the Targum literally reads, and the Memra of Yahweh said, and they will make for me a sanctuary, and I will cause my Shekinah to dwell among them. So they will make for me a sanctuary, and I will cause my Shekinah to dwell among. This is the Memra of Yahweh speaking. So we understand that this is the sanctuary that God speaks about, that they will make for him, and that he will dwell with him through the sanctuary, and it's the Memra of Yahweh speaking. So again, the switch between Yahweh speaking to Moses versus now the Memra is speaking. So again, this goes back, which is interesting because that's how it starts in Exodus 25:1. Then Yahweh spoke to Moses, and in the Aramaic, in the Targum in the Aramaic, it is the Memra the Memra of Yahweh who speaks. So we see again this switch between the Tetragrammaton, the divine name, for the Memra. And this is what I'm saying. He says, they will, and I will cause my Shekinah, my glory. Now, this is also interlooked as far as being the word as well. In some marginal notes, they explain expanding on that. Some scholars expand that this is a reference also to the word. So some people would say, my Shekinah by my word to dwell among them. So it could be used either way, but this is the instance where we see the word of Yahweh speaking, and that they will make a sanctuary. They will make me a sanctuary, and I'll cause my Shekinah to dwell among them. So this is, again, a parallel to 1:14, John 1:14 versus Exodus 25:8 from the Hebrew and in the Aramaic Targum, which explains and interprets what Exodus 25:8 means. So let's go to the next one. Let's take a look at another powerful verse from the Targum, reflecting back to the Hebrew. A Hebrew translation, Leviticus 26:12 states, "Is I will also walk among you and be your God, and you shall be my people." Again, this is Yahweh speaking. Blessing and obediences. And of course, the Targum reads literally, "And I will set my word to walk among you, and my word will be your redeeming God, and you will be my people." So this clearly shows from the Targum that it is the word that Yahweh will set his word. He says, "I will set my word to walk among you." Again, this is the Memra, and my Memra, my word, will be your redeeming God, and you will be my people. What does that sound like? That is a direct reflection of John 1:14, and the word became flesh and tabernacled among us. And who did the word become? Became Yeshua Jesus, and he was their redeeming God. The Redeemer, we call him, and he is God, and is the Memra to walk among them, and his Memra will be their redeeming God, and you will be my people. That shows distinction between Yahweh speaking here about his Memra, who will walk among you. And of course, the word became flesh. Yeshua, Jesus, walked among his people. He tabernacled, and the word became a redeeming God for his people. And that's exactly what we find in Scripture. Now, even within the Hebrew New Testament manuscripts, we find that Yeshua, Jesus, is referred to as Adonai, Yahweh, El, Ha'adon. All these titles, Elohim and Eloah, are all attributed to him in these Hebrew New Testament manuscripts that we currently have. So again, we see this continuous parallel John is utilizing in referencing and understanding of the Targum, this interpretive and explanation that we saw and that we will continue to see, that John is reflecting not on wisdom literature, but on rabbinic sources within the Targum oral tradition of the Memra. And this is not a wisdom personification, but a literal personage that we will soon see next, that the word, the Memra, is distinct from Yahweh himself, and yet he is still Yahweh Elohim. He is still a part of Elohim and a personage of God himself. So this is how we're going to continue to look forward. We're going to make a clear distinction now between the word and Yahweh from the Hebrew Bible, not the Targum, but from the Hebrew Bible. We're going to show distinctions. We're also going to show wisdom literature and the problems with the fallacies that of false equivocation and category errors that a lot of people make in trying to associate John's prologue as wisdom type Christology. So let's continue. All right, let me conclude John 1:14 with this part, the connection. In Hebrew, Yahweh himself promises to walk among his people, as we just saw in Leviticus 26:12. And in the Targum, this becomes the Memra of Yahweh walking among them. And again, if we look at it again, he says, moreover, I will make my dwelling among you, and my soul will not reject you in verse 11. Verse 12, I will also walk among you and be your God, and you shall be my people. I am Yahweh your God in verse 13. So again, we see this constant promise of Yahweh walking. This is a foreshadow for John to see that in the Targum, this becomes the Memra, the word walking among them. This is his word we just saw earlier. My word will dwell among you and will walk among you, and he be redeeming God to his people. And this is what the word Memra becomes flesh and literally dwells among his people, fulfilling what the Targum already foreshadowed, as in John 1:14. So this is clear from the interpretive explanation of the Targum that John 1:14 is that John himself is reflecting back to. Just like Paul did earlier, we saw in the beginning, John is doing the same thing all throughout the first 14 verses, 1 through 14, even to get to later on. But this is the prologue of John that goes with the Targum, which is not wisdom literature. Again, this is interpretation, explanation within the Aramaic, looking at the Hebrew, and then writing what the Hebrew means and what it's trying to say. Now, this doesn't mean that you can't say what is literal and not. That's a different category of saying, well, this is literally, this is non-literal. But again, when you are taking the word, and we're going to see from the Hebrew, not the Targum, again, moving forward, that you're replacing the Tetragrammaton, you're replacing Yahweh and Elohim with the word. This shows that they believe that the word was Yahweh and was God, was Elohim in that concept of these passages, specifically here in connection with Leviticus 26. This is where we see the completeness and fullness of John 1:14 from the Targum. He's not going off of wisdom literature. He's going off of the oral Jewish tradition of the Targum, just like Paul did. So again, let's move forward. We're going to see a clear distinction now of the word Davar Yahweh being distinct from Yahweh himself from the Hebrew scriptures, and what kind of brings the Targum in full circle and in full completion. Let's move forward. All right, so let's look at now the key verse that brings all this together as far as making the word a distinct person from the Hebrew Bible. Not just from the Targum, but from the Hebrew Bible itself. So this is not going to be an interpretation or an explanation. The text is going to say what it says without me having to explain it, or the Targum. This comes in 1 Kings 19, the 9 through 18, as Elijah encounters the word of the Lord. Now, he first was fed by the messenger of the Lord along the way to the mountain of God. So the angel of the Lord feeds him and gives him strength, and he gets to the mountain of God. We're going to look at verse 19. This is going to show complete distinction from the scriptures themselves, not from the Targum, just from the Targum, but from the scriptures themselves, the Hebrew Bible. So it says, then he came there to a cave. He's talking about the mountain of God, and lodged there. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him and said, what are you doing here, Elijah? That's verse 9. And Elijah says, I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the sons of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword, and I alone am left, and they seek my life to take it away. So think about this. Elijah meets the word of the Lord. Now, the author of First Kings says the word of the Lord came to him, and Elijah doesn't say, "Oh, word of the Lord," but he does say, "I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the sons of Israel have forsaken your covenant," speaking to the word, "and killed your prophets with a sword." So they torn down your altars, have forsaken your covenant, killed your prophets. So Elijah is fleeing from Jezebel, gets to the mountain of God, meets the word of the Lord, and they have this conversation. So the word says, what are you doing here, Elijah? Elijah tells him what's going on. And then the word of the Lord says something very interesting to him. He says, so he said, referring to the word of the Lord, go forth and stand on the mountain before Yahweh. And behold, Yahweh was passing by. So the word of the Lord speaks to Elijah. They have a conversation. And then the word tells Elijah to go stand before Yahweh himself, and has the same exact conversation. How do I know that? Because after he hears these noises, these soft noises and so forth, move down. It says, and behold, a voice came to him and said, what are you doing here, Elijah? So the same question is asked by Yahweh himself. Remember, the word said, go stand before Yahweh, and Yahweh was passing by. So he tells him to go on the mountain. This, there's no way, I mean, if you want to argue the word of the Lord is the Lord himself as a word, this makes no sense in its context of the word of the Lord coming to Elijah. Elijah is speaking to him as the Lord himself, saying, your covenant, your altars, your prophets, what belongs to you, the word of the Lord, as according to the author of First Kings. And then the word of the Lord says, go stand before Yahweh, who is then passing by. And then Yahweh says to him, what are you doing here, Elijah? And then Elijah says the same exact thing in Hebrew, which I'll read in English, the same exact conversation. He says, I have been zealous for the Lord, the God of Israel, the God of hosts. For the sons of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with a sword, and I alone am left, and they seek my life to take it. Verse 14. So, what's going on here? This makes absolutely no sense if the word of the Yahweh is the same person as Yahweh and there's no distinction. This makes no sense. This only makes sense, yes, that this is the same word of the Lord who appeared to Abraham, by the way. Abraham met the Lord in Genesis 12, and then 15 he met the word of the Lord and calls him Adonai Yahweh. Here Elijah meets the word of the Lord according to 1 Kings and addresses him in a conversation as God. Remember, your covenant, your altars, your prophets. They killed, destroyed, and did all these things. And then the word of the Lord says, go stand before Yahweh who's passing by at the mountain. And then the word of the Lord, and then the Yahweh himself says, what are you doing here, Elijah? So again, this is where we cannot, dismiss this with any explanation other than that this is a distinction between the word, according to the author of First Kings, to Yahweh himself, because he hears these sounds and Yahweh's not there. Yahweh says the Lord's not there. The Lord's not in the wind. The Lord's on the fire. But he's then he says he behold a voice, and he says, what are you doing here, Elijah? And he has to say, and then the Lord said to him in verse 15, go return your way to the wilderness. So the Lord who was speaking to him says, the author says, the Lord said to Elijah, go. I mean, if you can't see a distinction here in just the plain Hebrew understanding of the text and the English here, no Targum needed, then I don't know what to tell you. There's no hope for you, because this is not wisdom literature. The word of the Lord is not part of wisdom. He's a distinct person according to 1 Kings 19, verses 9 through 15, where it identifies the Lord who's speaking to Elijah. So I don't know what to tell you about this, because this is as clear as cut as you're going to get to show that the word of the Lord is distinct from Yahweh himself, according to the author of 1 Kings. They are not the same person. And Elijah speaks to him as the Lord, and then speaks to the Lord in the same way. So this is literally, for me, the nail on the coffin, because there's no way to get around this. There's no way to try and make this into any kind of non-literal wisdom type genre or anything else. This is literally what's going on. This is not a vision. It's not a vision. It doesn't say, there's no word for vision here. It says he came to the cave to lodge there, and then the word of the Lord appeared to him. It doesn't say he went there and fell asleep and the vision came like it did with Abraham. No. This is a speaking, and he goes and speaks before the Lord immediately, where the word tells him to go stand at the mountain before the Lord who is passing by. So there's your nail in the coffin. There's no way around it. The Memra of Yehovah is our redeeming God. He became flesh. He tabernacled among us. He is God throughout the scriptures. The Targum interpreters and translators and explanations of it from those sources give us that understanding. This is not wisdom Christology of John 1 through 14, or even through 18 as the book gets through, but 1 through 4, definitely not. There's no way to get around this. This is the strongest text, I think, to solidify and to bring it all together, to say this is a distinct person from Yahweh himself, the word, Devar Yahweh, the word of Yahweh. So now let's talk about wisdom type literature and what it means and what it doesn't mean in regards to the Memra or the word or even Davar Yehovah. Sorry, Davar Yahweh. I have a tendency to interchange both of them, so I apologize. All right, sorry about that, but let's recap before we get into our conclusion and then wisdom literature. There's a few more slides you need to cover and some conclusions with everything we just went through, and then we'll start wisdom literature. But again, to get this key point in 1 Kings 19, the distinction between the word and Yahweh himself is made there. No ifs, ands, or buts, that this text distinguishes between the word of Yahweh and Yahweh himself. Both speak with Elijah, both give the same message, and both are treated as divine persons by Elijah. And this shows the word, Memra Devar, is not merely God's speech, but a distinct person who is fully Yahweh, even amongst the Aramaic Targums. So this is a recap of 1 Kings 19. Now let's go over the conclusions of what we just went through with the Targum, and then we'll move on to wisdom literature. All right, let's go over some conclusions here with the Targums and John. Now we found in Genesis 1:1 that the Word and the Son is the Creator, not wisdom. Wisdom is a created thing, with God in creation, but the Word and the Son is the Creator. He is eternal by using the divine name Yahweh and Elohim in accordance with the Word. We find that the Word tabernacles amongst Israel, the Word walks among His people, and the Word of Yahweh speaks as a person distinct from Yahweh yet fully divine in 1 Kings 19. So in conclusion, 1 John 1 and 1:14, John declares that the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. This is clear from these passages. We went through all the different Targums to bring this in, that the Word is not only the Creator, but He's also going to be other things as well. But He is the Word and the Son in the different Targum, and the tabernacles, walks among His people, and of course He's distinct from Yahweh Himself in 1 Kings 19. This is very important to get all this. If you didn't get all of this, please go back and rewatch this, but this is what we're trying to conclude here. Let's go to the next conclusion. Right, so the final conclusion is this, that the word, which is the Memra and Davar in the Targums and the Hebrew Bible, is not just God's voice. He is a distinct divine person who creates, dwells, walks with his people, and appears distinctly from Yahweh himself. And John identifies this word as Jesus, or Yeshua the Messiah, the Son of God. This is what we have concluded by all this, and if you don't agree, I'm sorry, but the evidence is clear. So I'm not merely giving you my views on this interpretation. I'm looking at the Targums, how the Jewish sources put this together, the Hebrew Bible. These are all things that can be verified and checked, and that we see these interchanges between the divine name, Yahweh, and Elohim with the Memra, which is according to Hebrew, the Devar of Yahweh, and how they understood him to be involved in creation, dwells, walks, and appears all throughout the Hebrew Bible. So again, this is what we need to understand. This is separate from the genre of wisdom type literature. This is not the same genre. It's a different category when it comes to the Torah and how the Jewish interpreters from the Aramaic understood the Memra, who he was, what he did, what he was supposed to do, and even to the point where John is reflecting back on that with the Logos, or the Devar in Hebrew, and we saw in the Hebrew New Testament manuscripts, Bereshit Haya HaDavar. So this is what we got to understand. This is what we need to kind of draw our conclusions on, not from what someone believes is Christology of wisdom from wisdom literature when it doesn't fit. These are the true Jewish sources that John is literally drawing from, just like Paul did, like we described in the beginning. Paul did the same thing, and so does John. The Targum was a source of interpretation and explanation of the Hebrew Bible during the Second Temple period. So now let's move on to wisdom type literature and what it really means. All right, let's discuss wisdom literature. That the word is not wisdom literature, as I've been saying throughout this whole presentation. It's a different biblical language as far as genre. In wisdom literature, such as Proverbs, Sirach, Wisdom of Solomon, wisdom is personified, Chokmah, or even Sophia in Greek, poetically as a female figure who is with God in creation. In the Hebrew Bible and Targum, the title is not wisdom, but Devar Yahweh or Memra Yahweh, the word of Yahweh. And John follows the word tradition, not the wisdom figure. So we see again that this fits within the genre of the interpreters and the explanation within the Targum oral tradition of that time that John is drawing from, just like Paul did. So again, this is different type of genre. We're going to continue to see more of what this is in comparison to each other, because people get confused between what Proverbs is and what the wisdom of Solomon and Sirach at the Chokmah or the Sophia. The poeticness of the Hebrew of these other writings, non-biblical writings, do not fit what the Hebrew Bible explains about the Devar Yahweh or Memra Yahweh from the Aramaic. So let's move on to the next slide. All right, a couple of things we got to point out here is that the word acts as a person, not as a personification, or not a personification itself. Genesis 15:1, the word of Yahweh appears to Abraham in a vision, a real encounter, not a metaphor, and then makes a covenant with him. And Abraham addresses him as Yahweh, as Adonai Yahweh, my Lord Yahweh. And 1 Samuel 3:21, Yahweh revealed himself by the word of Yahweh. And of course, 1 Kings 19, we see from verses 9 on that Elijah speaks first with the word of Yahweh, then stands before Yahweh himself, showing a distinct person with the same conversation. And Elijah speaks to both of them as divine beings in the conversation, and it's the Lord who speaks at the end. And of course, wisdom literature never portrays wisdom as literally appearing, speaking, or being worshipped, or being called upon it the way you saw in the Torah or in the prophets and the writings. This is not the same genre. It is totally different. And so we got to make a clear distinction that between wisdom and the word or the memra, the devar, the wisdom and those do not do the same things. They're not interchanged with the divine name, divine titles, doing the same things. We will look at a chart at the end showing how these things are separate and distinct from each other in different types of categories. We also see that the Targums confirm the word is Yahweh God. The Targum replace direct appearances of Yahweh with the Memra of Yahweh, especially where God interacts personally with people. Wisdom never happens that way with wisdom, not in that same way at all. There's no replacement. You see examples, like I said, in Hebrew, my presence, they will go with you. The Targum is Memra will go with you. The Memra is worship, trusted, and called upon or prayed to from Genesis 20:21, Deuteronomy 4:7, which goes far beyond the poetic function of wisdom. It is not the same. What the word does, wisdom does not and cannot do. So there's a difference between Hebrew poetic poetry versus the literal personages of the word who acts and does things that only Yahweh Elohim can do. So again, John's gospel deliberately chooses davar in the Hebrew, logos in the Greek, and not Sophia or the Chokmah. So in the beginning was the word, logos, davar. And if John wanted to identify Jesus with wisdom literature, he could have written in the beginning was wisdom, Chokmah, or Sophia. Instead, logos is used, or devar, tying Jesus to the memra and devar tradition of the Targums and the Hebrew Bible. That is important because we see this out throughout the Hebrew scriptures and in the Targum. We see no evidence of wisdom literature or wisdom type of language within the Targums. Is using the Chokmah or in the Hebrew, or the Sophia in the Greek, or even in the Aramaic form. Is not, now John could have used that, but like I said, he's doing what Paul did, reflecting off the person of the word, as we saw earlier. So this is also another important distinction we need to make. So some distinctions we're looking at is the wisdom is created and the word is eternal. Proverbs 8:22, Yahweh created me at the beginning of his work. John, in the beginning was the word, and the word was God. Not only next to God, but it was God, eternal. Wisdom literature presents wisdom as the first of God's work, a created attribute, while John presents the word as uncreated, eternal, and himself God. Again, reflecting off of the Jewish oral traditions of the Targum, as Paul did. So again, clear distinction. One's eternal, one's created. And that's where we find the difference between wisdom and the Word, Memra, Devar. So, in conclusion, with wisdom literature, we find that wisdom in Proverbs is a poetic personification of an attribute of God, while the word, Devar, Memra, Logos, is a distinct person who is both Yahweh and God and appears to prophets, is worshipped, and creates, dwells, and redeems. Now, John 1 1 through 14 cannot be explained by wisdom literature. It is rooted in the biblical and Targumic revelation of the Word of Yahweh fulfilled in Jesus Christ. And this needs to be clearly understood because to get wisdom Christology, you really have to stay in one box category and commit different fallacies of equivocation, category errors, and so forth. Going outside of that, you will not come up with John 1 1 identifying anything in wisdom literature. All right, now let's look at the word versus wisdom. This is our final slide, and so let's take a look at the different categories. We have wisdom, chokmah or Sophia, versus the word devar, memra, logos. We have Proverbs 8, Syriac 24, Wisdom of Solomon for biblical sources. Well, we look at the Hebrew Bible, the Targums, and of course John chapter 1, verse 1 through 14. Gender form, feminine, poetic figure described as created as far as wisdom is concerned in Proverbs 8:22. And of course, the word is uncreated and eternal. The role, personification of God's attribute of wisdom, while the word is distinct person who creates, reveals, and redeems. Function in text, literary metaphor for wisdom, not worshipped or prayed to. The word appears in vision, speaks, is trusted, worshipped. We see this in Genesis 15, Samuel 3, Genesis 20, 21. Language used, chokmah in Hebrew, Sophia in Greek, while devar in Hebrew, memra in Aramaic, and logos in Greek. Different genres, different word usages. Relation to God, stands beside God as his first creation, that's wisdom. While devar is in logos is the word was with God and was God. And we saw that in the Targum with the interchanging of the divine titles. And of course, dwelling. No role in tabernacling with Israel, not for the wisdom, but the word tabernacles, walks among his people and redeems them, as we saw on the different Targum passages in Exodus, Leviticus, and so forth. So again, this is the word versus the wisdom. There is no comparison as far as being connected to wisdom type literature or Christology. The word is in a different category and genre altogether. It cannot be equated or put in the category of wisdom literature at all. And if you think you can, then you are violating many rules of the basic biblical hermeneutics. You're committing exegesis or you're committing eisegesis instead of exegesis, and you're in violation of simple Jewish principles of interpretation in regards to looking at how a Targum is understood versus wisdom and poetic literature in Hebrew, or even in translation to Greek in the non-biblical texts or books. So again, this is something that needs to be corrected. I know Dr. Dustin Smith wrote a book on this topic. I've read it. He does not get into this area in his book. He categorizes and puts in a box John 1:1 with strictly only wisdom, which you cannot find a connection with like you can with the Targum. Again, this is what we find. You make your decision. You draw your own conclusions. If you are on the fence and you're not sure, then definitely read his book. Look at the work we've done. Look at this PowerPoint again. Check the sources for yourself and study how Jews understood the Targum and what John would have been reflecting to, just like Paul. But if you are a Trinitarian, I think you will definitely love this and use this as a resource. If you're a non-Trinitarian, I ask that you look at this carefully, draw your own conclusions. I know you probably won't agree with it all, but this is something you need to consider how we view John 1:1 and 1:14 in regards to the type of genre and the type of language is used within the Aramaic. That's how we see it. That's how we view it as Trinitarians. So again, I hope this helped. This is a great in-depth, over an hour presentation, but I hope it does help in teaching you more about the word in John 1:1 and 1:14, how it became flesh in connection with the Hebrew Bible and in the Targum of the oral traditions, how Jews utilize those interpretive and explanations in those paraphrase literature. So again, I want to thank you for tuning in to Bible Answers Unfiltered. I am your host, Dr. El Garza. Please like, share, and comment. I try to answer every thought, every comment I can. And thank you, and God bless, and we'll talk to you soon.